Hello, everybody, and thanks for attending this new talk of the series of the IULM Flow Talks. Today, we have a particularly interesting topic and guest. I think this is one of the most interesting and disruptive experiments today being conducted in Italy on social innovation in the field of migrants integration. And Migrants is actually the name of the project and of the app. And I have the honor to have with me today Rudra Chakraborty from Migrants that will tell us about this really interesting experience and also how this is transforming in a relatively complex country like Italy, the relationship and the integration dynamics of migrants, and more generally, of course, the attitude of society towards this. So welcome, Rudra, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Professor Sacco. It's a real pleasure to be here. And good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, based on where people are following us from. So it's a real pleasure to be here. I am substituting Chris, who was supposed to be here. Unfortunately, he is unable to be here. I'm sending our regards to him. And I'll be telling you a story of how this began in Italy and what migrants is. And it would be great to converse with you looking at it from different points of view, Professor Sacco. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Rudra. I think you ideally already set the stage for the question, which is obviously this one. What's the history of migrants? What's the rationale behind it? What is the necessity from which it started and how it has unfolded through time?
So the concept itself is a brainchild, is Chris's brainchild, to be very honest. So Chris's upbringing is also very important here. I mean, he basically was brought up between the US, Europe, and originally he has Ivorian parents and also has a Swiss passport. So there you go. There are already four cultures involved there. And then growing up, Chris started working for Frontex. And I think everybody knows Frontex as the European agency which looks after migration issues. And Chris was on the field with Frontex for many years and moving around the southern part of Italy. And basically, he was there looking at the migration influx and working in physical sites when he said, there is so much of an inflow that it is impossible to be everywhere physically present. It is time to tune up and go digital. So that was one of the first things Chris thought. Obviously, his background and everything helped him. And together with him, there was also Aisha, who is a co-founder, and she was the one who brought in the learning part. So when Migrants was born, it was born as an information service. So if you are not an economic migrant, so let me tell you, let's immediately break down the influx of migration into Italy into different parts. So you have economic migrants coming in through airplanes, who we know actually very little about. The expatriates and the economic migrants, we know very little about. The news and the media basically talks about those who come via land, via boat, or other modes of transport. Now, this is also the part of migration that is least served, not just in Italy, but all across the world. If we look at migration flows from Southern America towards the US, there is a part that is served, which is the intelligentsia, which is the group of people that are flying in, and the other part is unserved. Now, Chris, through Frontex, was looking at this unserved populace, and he said, first of all, there is a legal part that we need to provide. That is the correct amount of information, the right information, provided digitally, accessing the kind of technology that migrants bring with them. Let me break a myth. We always think that migrants, those coming by boat and by land, have high-end technology. One of the stories that we were told during the Arab Spring was everybody has a telephone and everybody is doing great digital things. True, but if we go down and look at those telephones, they are basically first and second generation telephones. So there is a technological obstacle that immediately we have to overcome if we have to provide the right kind of information. It also has to be provided in the right format. so that first generation telephones are able to elaborate that information. So this was Chris's first, let's say, obstacle. Someone might think that the legal part, how do you prepare right legal information for individuals coming into Italy, not knowing anything about the law, not knowing anything about civil society here? How does this kind of person apply for, let's say, a status? So Chris, first of all, placed a pillar in that area, the right kind of information, so that everybody has the information to make the right kind of, let's say, statement or request towards the Italian European authorities. And that was step number one. Step number two, what happens to you when you make that request? You got to wait for an answer. And how many days does it take in average to get an answer? 600 days. And now Chris asked himself the second question. What does a person do for 600 days while he or she is waiting? And that is when I think Chris flipped up and he said, we should not be providing information, but we also need to identify, provide a little bit of training and identify what people know. Because information means you can ask for your status, but the real assimilation process, getting into society, everybody has to start working and be productive. That's when an individual will start feel that they are part of society. So he moved together with Aisha, the barometer a little, and started creating gamified quiz formats. I don't want to talk difficult. Gamification, not a complex word, okay? Gamification in the simplest of ways. Imagine a multiple choice. Imagine that migrants measures how you learn and how you forget. These are micro learning modules, small bits. A module is composed of, let's say, 15 questions, and you can have a basic, medium, and advanced level. Inside these 15 questions, we started basically providing legal information. So rather than provide the information on a piece of paper written down point by point, we were providing them in a question and answer multiple choice format. This created the curiosity, and this also started what is the learning and forgetting curve of individuals. So basically, we can see how the individual, for example, tries to understand what is the right process to get a permesso di soggiorno. Okay, I'm just making this module up. Now, one thing is to get all the answers right immediately, which you probably won't. Another thing is to see that in 2 or 3 weeks' time, this person has repeatedly done the module, and after 3 weeks, are able to answer 100% questions correctly. So that for me is progression. And this was done slowly from 2017 up to today, to 2021. Right now, we have thousands of modules on soft and hard skills. For example, one of the hard skills that we are following is mechanical engineering. So you have modules of mechanical engineering created with professors of universities, validated by corporates, so that when the person does the whole module, he or she is ready or is validated based on performance. And this is another point where Chris, I think, at least when he told me the story, when I met him back in 2017, he told me, you know what, there is a big trust factor. And it's true for all of us. If we are going to be employed, we always show our degree. Trust me, I'm good. But this is like a balance sheet. I mean, it's a one-shot photo. What about reliability? What about being able to show repeatedly that you can actually perform? And nowadays, all across the world, we have platforms. For example, in Italy, there's a great platform, not advertising here, but it's called Just Knock, and there you go. And what they do is you gotta really show up, and you gotta try and showcase a project. If you do a good project, which the company wants to do, then they will employ you. Well, that way basically it's credibility plus reliability. We're trying to do the same thing, and the way we're doing it is by assessing the hard and soft skills of migrants who've come to Italy, and what we are trying to do is identify the real talent amongst them. Now, the hardest thing also, and I'm going to finish here, Professor, so I can give the ball back to you and we can converse. The hardest thing in the first part was, what does the market want? What does the Italian market want? Because migration, there's all levels. Do they want mechanical engineers? Do they want people to work in restaurants? Do they want delivery people? What does the market want? So here, 2 years of analysis for Chris and Aisha to actually identify 6 channels. Every time that a user signs up onto the application, he or she has to choose which channel he or she wants to go into. Because we believe that the channel, being in part of a channel, is a sort of guarantee that at the end of the channel there will be work opportunities because we have already studied and we have chosen those channels. So, for example, you have an IT channel, mechanical and electronics channel. And obviously, for the IT channels, if you know coding and, I don't know, 8 different languages of coding, there is a greater possibility that you'll find a job. So those are our high skill channels. Then, for example, we have some mid-level channels. If you are good with translations, you're good with languages. So, for example, out of our 105,000 users right now, 86% can speak French or English. So that's a great, it's a great soft skill. It's a middle channel for people who want to work in hospitality or in translation or interpretation services or localization, generally speaking. So there's that. There's also some other areas where, allow me to call it the third level or the lower level, if you wish, where we have people who know how to do maintenance and repairs, or general delivery people, or cleaning services. So there are 6 channels in which a user can get onto, and then he or she has to do a series of modules to validate. What we provide to Italian society is a validated dynamic CV versus a static CV, which is not validated, which I would give to a company. Is, for example, if I go into Migrants, I say I'm a mechanical engineer. What we do is we validate to the extent you are a mechanical engineer based on micro learning modules that we create, and we create a dynamic CV. And based on this dynamic CV, where companies can see the performance of the individual, they may choose to recruit, hire this person. So
Wow.
this is the entire process through which we are going now, and we have been going through it over the last 4 years.
Really impressive, Rudra, and that's not just for the sake of talking. But there is probably yourself. I mean, the migrants people are not the right people to ask this, but the immediate issue that arises when one listens to you is shouldn't be the state that provides these basic services, because in the end what you're doing is really to work at the basic citizenship level, and one would expect that today in highly industrialized societies at least there should be something accounted for by the state, but so
Well,
probably but what's your comment on this?
well, there is a growing field of thought that believes that there should be an industry called the hybrid industry. The hybrid industry is the one, for example, Migrants is a B Corp. So, just to give you an idea, that basically means that we are for profit and for social returns. A large amount of social innovation, if we also look towards Latin America, or I can do it personally, if I look towards my own country of origin, which is India, a lot of this, governments, central governments such as Europe, are not present all over the place. Now, in a scenario like Europe, Europe could do it, Europe does do it. Maybe efficiency can be improved, but surely situation is better compared to a country like India, which already has a series of issues and will find it hard to really expose itself in working to assimilate migrants coming into India. What happens there is that, for example, in India, you have this hybrid industry, which is a combination between public and private that serves this migration. What we are seeing in Italy right now, and honestly, our viewpoint is a very limited viewpoint, Professor Sacco, because there's just us in this market. So it is very dangerous to say what we think, and it is very dangerous to think that what I'm saying is true because it's one viewpoint. It's not two, 20, 30. But what we can say is we exist where local state authorities, comunes, regioni, come to us and ask us for training services in, let's say, centers where they have a huge mass of people. For example, in the last weeks, where there's a group of people who have just arrived and the local services do not exist to assess, to inform. They come up to migrants and say, can you help us with this? And generally, so we have a business line which is going towards authorities, which is institutional. So basically, would I say that we have institutional clients? The answer is yes. Our institutional clients are the local cities which have a hard time in assimilating the first wave of migration, the second wave, whatever we want to call it, who don't have the right structures and services. Or, for example, if a new let's say a new area is set up for the aggregation of people who have just arrived to Italy, these new areas are set up based on where we have space, where we are able to provide services. What kind of services? Basic need services: food, water, clothing, protection. But once you've got those, once people are there, what they really aspire to is the next level. And that's when the local comunes come to us and like, can you do training? Could you assess if there are people who can immediately join a workforce, or if these people are ready to do municipal emergency duties with us for our city? Because there are lots of requests of all kinds. Some cities would like to employ these people who are staying there in a position to do civil work. Others would like to ask them to join workforce. Others would like to assess them and understand who they are, what needs, what are their aspirations. So in my view, we are in a very murky gray area, which is, according to me, the hybrid industry. And yes, ideally, states should be doing it because it would mean that we are ready or trying to figure out if our identity has changed. Professor Sacco, I'm making a very dangerous comment here, and I'm aware of it.
Yeah, we are aware. We take all responsibilities, not yours. It's our own responsibility for inviting you. So don't be concerned for this. No,
Well,
but at this point, it's almost impossible not to ask you. But why Italy? I mean, of all countries. And first of all, and second, from your viewpoint, that clearly is Italy focused, but clearly also has a global perspective. What are the main peculiarities of the Italian situation in your view?
right. So, why Italy is an extremely interesting question. And I think Chris and Aisha's answer would be, first of all, Chris's answer would be, that's where I did my groundwork, I think. That's where I really understood that there was this issue. So I set it up. And Aisha, being from Sicily, I think she would say, those are our roots. So the fact that Aisha had her roots here in Sicily and the fact that Chris did his groundwork here, I think that's the first level. Why Italy? Now, the second level is also the way Chris has worked and his experience initially, given that the legislation actually has specific loopholes and specific requirements in different countries. We were very strong. Chris, Aisha, and the initial team were very strong on the legal part initially for Italy. So obviously, it was easier to build at that point. So obviously, you go with what you know at that point. And initially, nobody knew how many people would sign up. And now, I'll be honest. I met Chris back in 2017, and my first meeting with Chris is very poignant. So we are at an event by the John F. Kennedy Foundation in Italy, and Chris is being awarded. And Chris has just started the company, and I am coming from years of international headhunting, in multicultural headhunting, and I'm looking to diversify my company's business. And Chris is telling me a story which is bottom up. And I'm telling him that I recruit multicultural resources that are then placed in multinationals or in Italian companies going abroad. And I say, this is a great match. So I got the top of the market and Chris has the bottom of the market, which actually means Chris has more numbers because the top of the market has limited numbers. You got high skill, but limited numbers. So first of all, there's a match there. And the way Chris walked into this room was, I'm doing my thing. And it's already being recognized. So initially, I think Chris wasn't even sure how much momentum he was going to get. I don't know if I'm pretty sure. I might be a little bit off mark because I knew Chris in 2017. I followed him and I actually joined the organization operationally last year. So I have a feeling that at the first 3-month mark, there was more than a 15,000 unit raise in number of users on the application. And that immediately creates a situation where you have to level up your game. You just got to go. And that's, I think, when Chris realized we need to go from information to assessment, because that's what we got to do. We got to assess and we got to identify where the talent is so that we can place. So Italy was situation, geographical presence, the legislation that Chris and Aisha and the initial team knew, plus obviously being here was an advantage, but I think there was also a cultural point. And I wish Chris was here because then we could get the final confirmation. And I'm coming to this basically from cross-cultural theory. So if we are talking about assimilation of different people of different cultures, and if we can agree that culture is a scale where you have one country on a polar side and another country on a polar side. So let me say, if I am talking about hierarchy, let's say, the amount of hierarchy we have in our society, I could say that there is a very hierarchical society where the difference between a boss and an employee is very, very high. That means you can't talk to your boss as a boss, and that would be Saudi Arabia, which is this hand over here that I'm moving. While on the other side, you would have a country like where my CEO and I, we can go out for a beer and we can casually talk, and that would probably be Sweden, and that would be this hand over here. Now, if I were to model cultures across the world, and let's say that there are many scales, whatever amount, and if I were to place Italy on these scales, there is something wonderful that happens. Italy, generally speaking, places itself where my face is, right in the middle. If you take any cross-cultural scale, whatever dimension, you can use Hofstede, you can use Ehrenmeier, whatever model there is, Italy generally places itself in the middle. What does that mean? Well, that means that we can flex. There is the tendency, there is the cultural potential to go both ways. By the way, Britain probably goes more in one direction, is not in the middle. The United States, not in the middle, zigzagging all over the place. Japan, surely not in the middle. Italy is one of those countries, most of the European countries, but Italy is one of those countries that tends to stay more in the middle. And that for me is another point which says, why Italy? Well, I think there is a lot of cultural potential here to push and go up and go to the next level. Plus, Professor Sacco, we will not deny it, our investors are also from Italy. So we did find investment here. So when you have the knowledge, when you have the local area, when there is, let's call it a cultural hummus, which is absolutely correct, plus, where better than Italy? The challenge is here. The challenge is here. If we can do it here, we can try and transition to France. If we can do it here, we can try and transition to Spain and Greece, where we've done a couple of pilots. And then obviously, if we then take the model and try to work on migration in other countries, we might find countries where it is easier. Certain examples could be Canada, multicultural nation, more open towards assimilation of cultures, could be more interested in our model. So that's the way I think it worked for us initially, and it is still working in Italy. Although we must say that we are starting to work with the corporates, and there are some obstacles there.
I can imagine. I can imagine. And no, thank you also for making this implicit reference to the cultural distance scales of Hofstede and the classical social science, because it's true. I mean, one of the most critical aspects of dealing with migrants is, of course, cultural diversity and really trying to understand how to create a middle ground in this regard. And the fact that Italy generally sits in the middle, it's curious because you see this in the attitude of Italians. If you make any kind of question to Italians about most stuff, they will answer it depends. It's never just black or white. It really depends on the context, and it depends on the situation. And this is sort of multi-stable condition in which you could roll down one side, the other side. It really depends. It's probably one of the reasons why it's so stimulating. Yeah, no, thank you for this, because sometimes also we learn from how we are seen from the outside, although your outside is a relative one. I mean, you are practically native Italian speaker, and this also creates a curiosity. You already started to tell us a bit your story, but what brought you here, and what brought you to migrants in the first place? You had some reference to this, but we would really like to know your story in some more detail.
So my journey is well, first of all, I'm of Indian origin, but I am what would be classified by literature as a third culture kid. And I don't know, I'm not a kid anymore, I'm 38, but that is the classification given to those like me. So the book comes out in 1993, which basically states this term, third culture kid. And it is also the year in which I turn 10. And the year after that, I leave India, which is my home nation. And basically, due to my father's work, we move around a couple of countries and live in Indonesia, Southeast Asia, and then end up in Italy. And at a certain point, I think 7 years go by of moving. And at the age of 18, I decide that Italy is the place where I would like to stop, because over the last 7 years, I have not had constant relations. I don't have any relations. I don't have any childhood friends. And you know what? It's time to settle down and finish my studies and start university. And I say, I don't want to move anymore. So let's do this. Let's stay here. And so being basically a third culture kid, to put it very simply, means that until the age of 11, I was in India. I speak 3 Indian languages. I moved to Indonesia. I don't want to learn Bahasa Indonesia because I think that English is a lingua franca, and I'm pretty arrogant about that. I moved to another place, and I think that English will take me places. And then finally, after different moves, I end up in Italy, and I'm like, the first day I landed in Italy is an interesting story. It was the day a very prominent politician declared that he was going to leave the TV business and enter into politics. So for me, that is always a very important memory. And I said, you know what, this is an interesting place to be. And it was 1993. And I think 1994, there was the World Cup, and Italy versus Brazil is a game that will always go down in my head as the moment when I decided, okay, I will root for this country because this country has the potential to win the World Cup. So I think 1994 is a very important year in my life and that summer. And basically, after that, moving on at the age of 18 in 2001, I spent a couple of years in Italy. And then I moved from Italy, did my graduation, did a couple of years in Switzerland, came back to Italy, finished my course of studies. Again, I signed up for a course at the IULM. I did my master's at this university, so I'm very happy to be here today. And that's when I was introduced to cross culture, by the way. So I have to thank IULM for this. I was introduced to cross cultural studies. And what happened from then on is basically I had the opportunity to work in the US and then once again back to Italy in a headhunting firm where I became an international recruiter. So, a little experience, a couple of years as a language interpreter and teacher from the age of 18 onward. So, I started working as a language teacher, and that was very useful for me with my English. Then, after my studies, I did a bit of lobbying. After that, I went into the PR and I started headhunting. Besides that, I was consulting in the banking sector. Then I got tired of it and I went into training. And after training, basically, I would say right now in my current scenario, I am a trainer slash recruiter slash consultant for performance activities, and I'm building basically the corporate pipeline for migrants. So I am the person who is trying together with Chris to get the big corporates on board and really latch onto our philosophy and use our platform. Because now is the stage. So this month we are launching our platform, which is called Pick Me. So the story I told you ended saying that um, we create a dynamic CV, but where does the dynamic CV go? The dynamic CV goes to the platform called Pick Me, which is nothing but a LinkedIn sort of platform where companies can put in their requirements and they can identify the right kind of CV. So basically, you could call us a LinkedIn for this kind of population. That's what somebody has tried to call us. But as you can see, the life journey, mine, Chris's, Aisha's as well, is extremely diverse. And our team is made up of basically people from multiple nations, and we also have a lot of large gender diversity, with 65% and more being female. So, I mean, diversity in all senses is just the language we speak, I would say. And multiculturalism is not a stage that we have to reach, but it is something that we have to go beyond, as Chris sees it. And Chris's motto and Migrants' motto is always opportunity and adversity. So he is the person who pushes us to go beyond and really tries to push us and really think, what does inclusion mean? What does diversity mean? How do we position this product in the eyes of a global corporate based in Italy, which is made up of Italian cultural standards, Italian approach to recruiting, and how do we get them to see value in this? So all our multicultural journey is trying to, it's being channeled to change the mindset and the way of thinking of big corporates, because if we don't bring on big corporates onto our platform, we can't think that we will be able to change the situation with small and medium enterprises. Yes, small and medium enterprises is very important in Italy, but it's the multinationals that we have to go to. So that's what we are working on right now.
Wow. So the team at MyGrants has a very diverse background. It's not just, just a stream of people coming from, let's say, Ivy League universities or whatever it is. It's really
Absolutely not. We are not. Well, let's put it this way. All walks of life are important. One of the main things is we really look towards people who have this linguistic and cognitive diversity approach. I think the key word is cognitive diversity. If we can put together a group of engineers, lawyers, and doctors, that is the best form of diversity, plus together with, if you want, ethnic diversity, gender diversity, everything. So diversity for us is a starting point, not a reaching point. It's our starting point in that case.
fantastic. We start to have some very interesting questions, Rudra. One
Right.
is, which country do you think could be hard for migrants to enter in, and why?
Well, legislatively speaking, legislatively speaking, and this is not my forte. Let me be honest with you. Um, I am going to go by what are the flows? What is the flow of migration? The flow of migration globally is not reducing, first of all. It is still at the same intensity. It is true, factually correct, that this is the first year, 2021, where we have seen a little dip in migration towards Italy, but it is due to other causes, but the general trend is on the rise. Hard. Where is it hard for migrants to enter? And I think the question here I would like to understand very clearly is the question about where our business might find it hard to enter, or was the question about generally about migration to enter? Because I want to
No,
be
it's
clear on that.
more, sorry. No, I think it's more about your business.
Right. So for our business, the hard part to enter is basically we would like to go into countries like the US and Canada. Canada could be partially easy, but the US, although could be technically easy in terms of funding, setting up shop, the thing is, there is a different culture, there is a different context there. The US is a context where we have racial issues, which, by the way, we don't have, or we think that we don't have, or we don't want to have here in Europe. So, for example, is there a risk of backlash in Europe versus Canada versus America? As we see it, there is a large risk of backlash in what we do here in Italy. So we try to keep things quiet. If we move to the American market, we will have to really make our voice heard because there is a lot of competition. In this way, the American market, we must also remember that the United States is the country which is most desirable by the large amount of migration forces to migrate to. So we have a lot more competition there, and I'm not sure if what I'm saying is perfectly correct. So Professor Sacco, please help me. There is a concept of competence, which is different here compared to the US. Now, the way Chris devised the model was trust in the person, in the migrant, in the person moving to that country from one culture to the other, comes from a certification, which is competence, plus reliability, which is basically data. We can show you visibly with a graph what is the performance of the user while he or she learns and progresses through modules. This is something that is extremely valuable. Data-based decision making. This is something for which America would be the right country, although it would be the hardest, it would be the right country to go to. At the same time, why Italy, Professor Sacco, you ask me? Well, in Italy, it is hard to convince the corporates that data-based selection is actually better than just looking at CV. So if we can break, once again, going back to your question, if we can break the barrier here, then we know that we will be more and more ready to go towards the US and Canada with our kind of model, which is actually more American and more American centric based on meritocracy and performance of the individual. So these are the difficulties. It's not a perfect answer that I've given, but I'm trying to tie it together. So the direction we are going towards is absolutely of the creation towards America and Canada. And obviously, in Chris's mind, the issue is we need to go worldwide. If the solution works here and it's digital, there is no limit to take it worldwide.
Absolutely. We also have a more personal question. Which are the most difficult challenges that you faced in your third culture kid life?
Oh boy. Wow. Now that can bring up some bad stories, you know. Okay,
Wow.
let me think which are the ones that I can use here. Most difficult challenges that you faced in your third culture kid life. So here's the funny story, and it's a true story, and it's an embarrassing story, but it's good to be embarrassed sometimes. Um, One of the things about growing up as a third culture kid is So being Indian, there is a lot of conformity in Indian society. So um, there are certain things that you can't do until a certain age. So I remember very clearly, I used to go to an international school in Milan, and at the age of 13, the school used to have an evening session, which they used to call disco night. Think of it as an American prom. Now, my concept of a disco night or prom in my mind was all the children walk into a room, sit in a circle, and there is music playing on a recorder in the middle of the room, and everybody listens to music. And I can probably bring my own tape or CD, and we can share and listen to this music together. Little did I know that walking into that room, I would have seen people embracing each other, dancing next to each other, kissing each other, things which you obviously did not see. And for me, the first time I walked into that room, for me, it was a culture shock. And this was the first week that I'd come to an international school in Milan. And when I saw that, after I had been in Southeast Asia before, when I saw that in Milan, I think the right word is culture shock or shell shock. So that always remains in my mind the way, and this has happened repeatedly over and over and over again. I don't think these are difficult challenges. These are incidents that put together reframe the person's mind. The real difficult thing of a third culture kid, and it really depends on the kind of, or the velocity with which you change countries, or the velocity with which you go through nations or schools. The most important thing is lack of social relations. If you live in one country all your life, you have social relations. If in those irrelational years, the teens basically, from 13 to 18, you keep moving, you don't build anything. So in my personal life, that is what I miss. So my best childhood friend still today is somebody I'd met at the age of 9 in India, and he is still my reference point because after that, I do not have anybody. I have people 18 onwards.
Wow.
Also, because international schools basically means that once you're done with school, people go off to study in universities all across the world. So you don't have that kind of relation that stays. So for me, the hardest thing was how do I build relations while people keep moving, which is
Wow.
if you want to work for a multinational, that is exactly what you have to do later in your life.
I mean, you really had a chance to have an early training for the work.
It is.
Yeah, and there is another question. Is there something you would like to suggest to students who in the future want to work in the social development sector, maybe some soft or hard skills to work on?
Right. Wow. This is a $1 million question, Professor Sacco, because the social development sector is first of all extremely large, and as I said, as I see it, it's a hybrid sector, and we need both highly technical skills as well as soft skills because we are building a world that is not based on any sector, not based on any benchmark. So basically, we are innovating. We are creating something with limits where there are legislative limits, monetary limits, technical limits, and we are trying to go beyond in a fixed amount of time and reach a business result. Something I would suggest to students, try as many different things as possible. Um, there is a tendency to specialize, but I think the rise of portfolio careers is more and more important. Over the 90s, we said T-shaped personnel or pie-shaped person. We said pie-shaped person because you had two verticals where you were very specific and then you could be a little bit transversal. Now, I think it even goes beyond. I think the portfolio career is what is happening. So if I look at the world now, I'm looking at a big multinational. Why should a multinational employ people all their lives? when we have platforms, digital platforms, where you can sign up, and this digital platform composes a group of people who will then go on the project. And once the project is over, this group goes away, is dismembered, and you go back to the platform. If I look at the world right now, the platform job market is more and more going to be a reality. And I think sectors might be a thing that in 10 years' time we might want to re-see a little bit. Now, the social development sector, which for me is both hybrid, public, private, you're going to need X amount of years of private experience in companies and X amount of years of public. So that's the first thing I think students should be moving towards. You need a little bit of public and private. You need a little bit of the public relations as well as the lobbying, if I got to look back at my life. So on one thing, you are working for private clients and trying to position them. And in another case, you're working with countries and trying to position them in the mind of another country. And it's a completely different approach, and it's done differently. So for me, that is the versatility that we need to survive in the hybrid sector. And I think, and here I'm just trying to speak for Chris, and data-based decisions. And this is something I am personally weak on, but I see the power of migrants, data-based decisions. Even things like diversity, inclusion, belongingness, they need data. We need to have softwares that are mapping large organizations or mid-sized organizations in Italy. If the leadership of this organization wants to make a change, it should first map what do the people in my company think. If you are the leader of a company here, a big company or a medium company, and you want to make a change, I think we need to have the approach of asking before moving, also because Italy is monocultural, is monoreligious, is monolingual. It's not taken for granted that everybody is inclusive. And by the way, just to make it clear, diversity is not a panacea. There are levels of diversity that don't work. There are many, but there's this fantastic research done by BCG back in 2017-18. They studied 300 German companies and Austrian companies in the tech sector. And the result is, you know what? If you want to innovate and really make new tech, generational diversity, not good. It doesn't work. So if you want to innovate, you shouldn't have a 25-year-old leader with a 35-year-old gentleman and two 55-year-olds and two 20-year-olds. It doesn't work. Or you shouldn't have a 55-year-old leader, a 35-year-old project manager, and 20-year-old staff. It just doesn't work. So diversity really cannot be a solution for everybody. So this morning I was talking also to a group of people who are in the luxury sector, and we were talking about diversity and luxury. I mean, look at those words: diversity, social justice, luxury, exclusiveness. How do you make these things go together? Not easy, not easy. So when we are working in social development sector, or when we are working in these hybrid areas, it's the data that really needs to be backed up with capability to communicate. So going back to the question, hard skills, yes, data-based decision. Soft skills, influence, the ability to influence decision makers. That is the biggest thing. And given that we are now inside these holes, influence becomes even more important. How do I influence virtually through the screen? So that's what I would have to say, Professor Sacco. I mean, that's a hard question.
Well, we have a tough audience that makes difficult questions, but you're getting along pretty well, I should say. But at this point, I think that the natural, probably final, who knows, but the natural question to ask is, what are the critical factors haunting the development of migrants, and what are the future scenarios? Where do you see the most interesting perspectives for future development?
Right. The most interesting one that we need to get by the end of this year is we need to bring on large corporates to our table and believe that. So, first of all, migration in Italy, the large amount of migration is of a specific type. We are not to think that all migration is talented, is highly qualified. So let me give you a number. For example, we have 105,000 users. 13,000 users are high skilled. So 13,000 users belong to the community of IT developers who know X number of programming languages, mechanical engineers, chemical engineers, etc., etc. These 13,000 people, based on their competence, are ready to join the labor force. What do we have to do as migrants to place them? We are providing the data. We are showing companies that this is the data that shows their performance across modules that have been created by professors in this country and that have been validated by companies in this country. What we need to get from them is the next switch, which, by the way, Professor Sacco, is the real deal. Can we get them to accept this data as a validation of performance? Very difficult, because many companies have strong HR units manned by 40, 50 people who also have to justify their presence. We are basically going also against a system that already exists. We have to convince people that not just competence, but reliability of that competence is something based on which we should be hiring. And this is difficult. In certain areas, it's easier. Let me make an example. If you think about the food industry, which has at the bottom of it the agricultural industry, which is seasonal, there are some food players in Italy, and that's quite a lot when I say some, this is the nation of food. There are some big companies in this sector that use seasonal labor. Seasonal labor needs to be accessed very quickly. And some of these companies spend a lot of money making sure that their talent pipeline is ready for the next season. MyGrants is a perfect fit if used as a solution to recruit, because you already have the validation that these people have competence. Agricultural work is not that high level work, but we already have that amount of people, so they can immediately go into the talent pipeline of the agricultural sector. And that is for us a quick win. It is harder for us to position people in the banking, insurance, energy sectors, because here we have the old state owned, pardon me, and I don't want to call it old, but let's please use the right word. I'm trying to use the right word, which is the culturally centric solidified thought, which is hard to break down because it has been developed like that, centralized and developed like that for a long time. So we need to always find the right interlocutor who will be our champion, and then try to convince others in the company. And that is not an easy challenge, because identifying the right people with the right mindset is the hardest thing. As we are trying to do as migrants, we now have to do it on the side of the companies so that we can get a match and they can be our champions. So this is the challenge in Italy. The next level of challenge globally, for example, is to partner, as I said, and is to work on creating intellectual corridors, if we may. And there is a movement within the European Union, and for example, even with Canada, Professor Sacco, we were talking about that earlier on. And Canada has, for example, declared that they're ready to accept X number of migrants per year. And that X number is quite large, 100,000 and above. So, what would happen if migrants were to be used as a tool to do pre selection in country of origin? And then, after you'd passed the modules, you could go to the consulate with that proof and basically start your bureaucratic journey. So, in this case, we're trying to partner up and try and move towards other areas. And I think on Chris's timeline, US and Canada are absolutely important, but we are also seeing a large amount of growth in the Middle East and Northern Africa. So we did a couple of projects, and what we found out is that our number of users are growing day by day in that area. Plus, the newest thing that we've done to incentivize people to join our application and choose a direction in their lives is basically we are allotting a sum of money per year to nudge people to go into one of those six channels where we know that there is a job offer at the end. So from this month, for example, users can earn up to 250 euros per month just by performing academically on our application. Now, please translate that. If I'm going to transfer 250 euros to certain states, in Central Africa, that could result in a certain amount of money, and that could result in a certain amount of talent signing up onto our platform. And that in the end could result in having a talent pool across the Middle East, Northern Africa, which then can be, can be a capacity for European countries to select from. So both directions, we are working both on the countries that we are aspiring to, as well as the countries that we see we are having strong growth, which is Middle East and Northern Africa. Those are the two areas.
Sure. What you're saying about the Middle East in particular doesn't surprise me at all because clearly I think of some states where if the migrants were not actively employed, the economy would collapse instantly. So in that case, there are countries that really completely rely on immigrant labor, and so I really understand why there is such a demand for this kind of services. So in the few spare minutes that we are left with, just one final question. Of course, you're doing a great job in providing services for migrants, but to what extent what you're doing is also helping the in this case the hosting societies like the Italian one to cope with diversity and to understand better how to create social value through, of course, migrants and more generally to being a more open and a welcoming country.
So there are two ways we can approach this, Professor Sacco. The first is, do we create the conditions first and then insert? Or do we insert and then try to create the conditions? It's I don't know if it's a chicken and egg scenario, but this is what we are trying to do, and this is what we've been trying to do over the last couple of months. So what we've done is we are providing, first of all, whenever one of our users is recruited, as migrants, we have an onboarding process where we measure the ability of the person to be comfortable in his or her new setting and how people in that team feel towards the entry of this person. It is very important because being having a sense of belonging in the beginning is very important for a person as our user who goes into a company, plus making sure that things are working right needs to be also observed and measured. Why measured? Well, we have to measure everything, as Chris says, we take decisions based on data. If we can show that certain methodologies of insertion into a company are better than others, first of all, it's a best practice, and this is something on which there is very little research. Actually, there's a lot of work, but there is very little data. So, for example, we have positioned over the last 2 years about 1,850 people into companies. A large amount of them, we also managed to get the data of how people were reacting to their presence. What we are trying to do now is our proposition is surely about the assessment and the insertion into the workplace, but we are coming up with a new service which works entirely on the cultural part of the company. And a large amount of this, Professor Sacco, has to be with the cross-cultural part that I was telling you about. Because, for example, in cross-cultural theory, first of all, there are three stages. There's multiculturalism, which is actually stage one. Then you have cross-culturalism, which is the comparison between one country and the other. And then there is the third stage, which is the interculturalism, where basically you start the fusion, allow me to call that, where you start mixing and matching the good and the bad of all cultures. And every culture takes a little bit from each one. Now, To get to interculturalism, we need to analyze what is happening in the companies. And in this case, we can use something like there is a very famous index called the Intercultural Development Index, which is used by people who travel from one country to another. And basically, it's a scale, once again, which tells you, are you at the forefront? Are you very adaptable? Or do you actually deny inclusion? So the first stage is called negation. The second stage is called polarization. The third stage is called minimization. And then you have adaptation and acceptance. So, for example, what we're doing is we are asking companies, so you want to do this, why don't you assess? Why don't we use this tool and assess and find out what is the mental state of people? And if you think that you don't have a good assessment, let's do a couple of workshops and try to see which is the direction in which the company wants to go. Because it is very dangerous if we do it for diversity, recruitment, and then there is nothing on retention. Because in the end, if the person is not retained, all our work is lost.
Sure.
So we are trying to provide a service also on this, which is on the retention part, so that basically we can go from recruitment, retention, reputation, business results. All these four are connected to each other. Migrants will start with recruitment, will work on retention. The reputation the company will do because it can talk about the kind of insertion, the kind of value that the person has brought to the company, and they can communicate it on press, media, etc. And then the person, because he or she is competent, because they were assessed as competent, because they perform well, you will get the business results. So that's the model within which we are thinking now, and we're trying to apply this.
Fantastic, Rudra. I think we've come to the end of this really, really inspiring conversation. We touched on so many different issues. I'm really grateful because I personally learned a lot from this conversation, but I think that also our audience, also given the kind of poignant questions they pose to us, I think that's, and to you especially, I think that's the best signal of interest we could dream of. So thank you very much for being with us today, and thanks for our audience for attending. And at this point, of course, we are ready to welcome you and look forward to the next installment of our IULM Flow series. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, Professor Sacco. Thanks for this opportunity. It was a real pleasure to talk with you. And thanks to everybody who was listening in.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.